To be introducing our next Hezekiah video interview with Ravi Dua. This Ravi is well known amongst the business community and network. He's advised Shell and also Coca-Cola. This is going to be part one of a two-part interview with Ravi over Zoom. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Hezekiah Mindset. I am Nash.
I'm Greg, and welcome to this call.
Man, it's interesting. This is us. This is our situation at the moment. Lockdown situation, and everybody on video chat. And I'm sure you guys are feeling it as well on your end. It's an honor to have Ravi Dua on our end. Ravi's joining us today. Ravi's a big part of our church, the church we're part of, as well as the marketplace. He's advised and consulted several companies around the globe, or several entrepreneurs, and as you would have seen in the profile on our social media, he's one who's very much keen on using wisdom from the Bible to help businesses succeed in the marketplace. It's an honor to have you, Ravi. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule.
Hey Nash and Greg, it's great to be on your amazing show. I love the name Hezekiah. It says a lot about wisdom and also following God and being obedient. So yeah, great choice of name.
Awesome, great. So just gonna sort of dig deep into it real quick. But Ravi, do you want to tell us about your personal journey, about your background, and give us a bit of an introduction of who is Ravi Dua?
Okay, so Ravi was born in India, left the age of 5, moved to Africa. My dad set up the civil service in Zambia, so I grew up in Lusaka, Zambia, did all my education there until my GCSEs, and then came to the UK to do my A-levels, and then started my chartered accountancy, which is where I got into the big companies, something like Ernst and Young, and then after qualifying, moved to the US and getting married, moved to the US and with Ernst and Young. And that's a little bit about me, a very quick sort of basically going through all continents. So very global. So I got United Nations in me, but the main thing is my citizenship is in heaven, So these are just temporal things and passports we hold. Yeah.
Great. Great. Do you want to sort of contribute in terms of maybe asking about the background as well?
Yeah. Really keen to just hear a little bit about your career journey, and in terms of, I know right now you give a lot into the business community and into entrepreneurs and stuff like that. Really keen to see and to hear about how that came about.
Yeah. So I went into chartered accountancy, became a chartered accountant, worked with the big guys, and within Ernst & Young, I was on the multinationals. So my main accounts were, I was known as a black liquid specialist, Greg. I was it's Coca-Cola and Shell my two main clients. So it was called the black liquid specialist for that reason. It was like a funny thing in there. But I got some great experience with multinationals, seeing how they ran globally with very diverse cultures. Like Shell at one end had a very different way of overseeing a global business, whereas Coca-Cola at the other end had a very different culture. And it was just interesting to see two big global players, totally different, running businesses globally, but in very different ways. And that was great experience. But my heart at that time was very much to look at what's the big company of tomorrow? Who's the big company of tomorrow? And one thing I found at that time, we used to have the big 8. We've got the big 4 now. The big 8 at that time were very short-term focused, and they would look at the high-paying clients, and the A team was on the big accounts. But they'd put the sort of C team on the sort of small entrepreneurial audits and things like that. And I really wanted to build that base within Ernst & Young, but basically I was, with that sort of differential and short-term thinking, I then started realizing I needed to part. And at the same time, I didn't know much about entrepreneurship. So I did an MBA, exec MBA at Cranfield. It's about 70 miles north of London. Largely because they were great in entrepreneurship and in marketing strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a 2-year exec MBA, but halfway through, which Ernst & Young paid for, you worked and you got 6 weeks, 7 weeks offsite. But halfway through that MBA, I just knew that I needed to be on my own, and so I left halfway. I left Ernst & Young in 1994, halfway through the MBA, and had to actually pay the second half by myself, which is painful. But at the end of the day, if you got to flow with what you really believe in, and take the risks, even though it's comfortable just to stay on and have a company car and have everything paid, but you don't achieve your vision that way. Whatever's birthing in you.
Yeah, and I think that really adds on to.
So that was my entree into. I missed the question there, Greg.
Yeah, just really keen, just to add on
went
to
silent.
Add on to that, the why behind the what. I think you've really touched on that journey that you've been on in terms of, working at a big corporate, and then now realizing your why is really empowering, motivating, and educating those who have that entrepreneurial sense.
It's gone silent.
We can still hear each other, can we? Hello?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, oh yeah, sweet.
Yep.
Greg, did you want to just ask that question?
I didn't catch the last bit, Greg.
Just really keen
if
to
you could ask that question, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, no worries. Just really keen to hear the why behind the what you do now. So the journey that you talked about, it's very inspirational, going to EY and then realizing that your passion was for those with the entrepreneurial mindset, those who are driven in that way. Really keen to hear about, how that shifted and your current why behind what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So so 1994, halfway through the MBA, I did the MBA to learn more about entrepreneurship, but it was from academia. And the thing with academia is you're really taught by mainly people who are academics but have not taken a risk in their life. So they talk very theoretical, written books, but basically, you always need to question, so how much have they put on the line, and they can talk about entrepreneurs, but have they been an entrepreneur themselves? So having come out of the MBA, I didn't know anything about much about entrepreneurs. So what I had started was I started my own accountancy practice. And that wasn't to grow an accountancy practice, but it was basically to learn about entrepreneurs. So they were my guinea pigs. And about 6 months after I left Ernst & Young, I had 200 clients.
Wow.
And I got staff to service them because I didn't know much about the basic, payroll rules and tax rules for small businesses, because we never got involved in those sort of things with the big companies. So I hired to my weakness, and in terms of the clients got everything they needed. But what I then did was I started giving them the strategy stuff which they couldn't afford for free. I selected a group, and in that group, I called them the Dirty Dozen. There were about 12 of them, and they got that for free, but they were my test bed for seeing, do my models that I've got from I've taken academia, I've looked at Shell and Coca-Cola, I've put the two together and I've said, this is what an entrepreneur needs. But in doing that, having worked with the entrepreneurs, I started getting into the mindset of an entrepreneur. What keeps him awake at night? What does he think about on the shower on a Sunday? And what are the worries? And so getting that mindset, you got Hezekiah mindsets. You got to get in the mindset of an entrepreneur before you can actually help an entrepreneur.
Wow.
And so over those 2 years, they were my guinea pig of 200 entrepreneurs. And then the dirty dozen, as I call it, the 12. And those 12 were getting my strategic advice, which I used to give to the big guys for a lot of money. I mean, in 1994, I used to charge £2,500 a day. And that's 6 years ago or whatever. Or was it 36? I don't know. The time flies. 26 years ago. And so having realized that these 12 that they were getting the advice, it became apparent over 2-3 years that they were growing at an astronomical rate between 1995 and 97. They were growing at a rate of between 20 and 247% a year, as opposed to the rest of the people. I mean, it was good economy at that time, and they were growing between 8 and 15%, which is good. And I realized there was something in that advice I was giving, and that started on a whole different journey. But the biggest event, actually, talking about the why, Greg, is I had an encounter with Jesus on the 1st of October 1997. So me doing all this testing, like being in a lab coat with all these entrepreneurs, on the 1st of October 1997, Jesus appeared to me Wednesday, 7:45 p.m., 1st
Wow.
October, and that changed my life. And I started reading the Bible, and I found more strategy in the Bible than all the MBAs and Shells and Coca-Colas I'd been with. And I felt the Lord say that He's called me to business, not to consulting. And that's what I actually then started taking equity stakes in companies rather than consulting with clients. So I'd actually take a 50% of the company. And that's what I started in November 97. I took 50% stake in an IT recruitment company, and the guy wanted to be a millionaire. He gave me an offer for a job, and I said, no, I don't work for anyone. I'm a businessman now. And then I just said, what do you want done? He said, I want to be a millionaire before I'm 37. So I said, okay, let's go on a journey. And we went on a journey, and he became a millionaire 2 years later in 1999,
Wow.
1 year before his 37th birthday.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so did I. Because I own 50% of the company, it was a 50-50. Joint risk.
So win-win situation at the end of the day. That's so good. That's so good. And just you talking about the wisdom from the Bible and how you something that you're really big on, and you just stated as well that you used a lot of the wisdom on the Bible, from the Bible, and you're utilizing that to consult your clients. Do you want to talk more about that and what that looks like from a practical perspective?
Yeah, it's so that's a very good question, Nash, and I get asked that so often because people say, hey, so how do you get strategy out of the Bible? And if you go through history in pre-Second World War, one of the key British generals who was training the Palestinian army actually used the strategies by David to train the Palestinian army from the Bible. What we don't realize is, I love, when I did A-levels, I did economics. I love economics. And actually, the father of economics is a guy called Adam Smith. He related to that he wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. But not many people actually link the fact that actually Adam Smith had written a couple of books earlier on before then. He was a theologian. Yeah, and all these hundreds of years ago, when actually he wrote that book, his theology books went into theology, and there was another category called science. That's how they categorize books. But when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, they said, this isn't a theology book. although he had got it from the Bible. So that economics, which is supply and demand, is from the Bible. It's specialism. What's specialism? Flowing in your gifting. Yeah. And trade. We're meant to trade. And by the way, this virus right now is stopping God's plan. God wants us to fill the earth, move around, and wants us to trade. What are the two things this COVID stopped? It stopped trade and stopped people moving. But that won't be for long. It's no surprise to God. But so if you go back, everything was about trade, specialisms. There were 12 tribes of Israel, and each tribe had a clan. Each clan had a specialism. One would actually be, make jewelry. The other one would make embroidery. The others would sing. The others would be farmers. And they would trade because they were specialists at that. So what you do is you trade with others, and that's your gifting helps you trade, and your gifting creates your value.
That's awesome.
And that's so economics. What I want to say was economics is from the Bible. In fact, Adam Smith talked about there's supply and demand, and the market sets the price, and things just work. And he then said there's an invisible hand overseeing it all. And it's there, and economists talk about this invisible hand. They think, is it this or that? But what Adam Smith was referring to was God. He said there's an invisible hand who just makes sure everything works all right. So back to this thing, the Bible has so much strategy in it. Economics started from it, military strategies in it. When I started reading the Bible from 1st October 1997, the Holy Spirit led me to I didn't even know what's Old Testament or New Testament. I just started at the front and started going forward. But I just felt us from chapters 12 to 22, 12 to 22, I was there for 3 months. And I kept reading everything about chapters 12 to 22. It's all about Abraham. And I now realized Abraham was a great entrepreneur. And then you realize God's plan, which was he moved Abraham from Ur of the Chaldeans, which is modern day Iraq, Mesopotamia, to Haran. And then from Haran, he moved into Bethel, a 1,500-mile journey. But the interesting thing is, what was Bethel? God moved him to a place which was the middle of 3 trade routes. Europe to Africa, Africa to Asia, and Asia to Europe intersected at Bethel. He put him right in the middle of 3 trade routes. And Abraham had camels and donkeys from Haran. Suddenly, the following chapter 13, it says, Abraham had great wealth of gold and silver. How did he convert that to gold and silver? He became a trader. And so God put him in the middle of 3 trade routes to show off his child and say, this is what his people would look at this, be walking by and say, who's that guy who owns that house on the top of the hill? Yeah, in Bethel. And the big tent around it, and they say it's Abraham, and he's growing and he's expanding, and he's expanding in influence, and his God is Jehovah. And that's who, and nothing's changed. God's doing the same thing. He's putting Nash, he's putting Greg in various places with strategic platforms. Why? They say, hey, so how do you get that wisdom? Who are you? The same thing. So we are the modern day Abrahams.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we are his light. We his neon sign, his advert, and it's so clear. And so I started seeing strategy. So you wanted to example strategy. Abraham became, very shortly, it says, there was an attack and some kings had been defeated. Abraham went with 318 of his trained servants, trained for war. He had trained them. Why would he have trained servants for war? Because guess what? He had a lot of gold and you didn't have a bank to put them in. So he had 318 servants trained for war, and he beat 3 kings. Yeah. How did he beat 3 kings? Because he was very strategic. So some great strategy. So a lot of strategy, a lot of stuff on entrepreneurship. And that's what I started getting into, all that. And I started applying that into businesses with Christians and non-Christians. I was very open that I was actually applying those principles, and they saw the fruit of that.
Wow. That's awesome.
I think, that's like I really admire the way that you approach that. And I think, being people that are listening, maybe who are non-Christian, I think there's, as Ravi's alluded to, there's just so much wisdom within the Bible. And I encourage you, if you've never read it before, to pick it up, to start understanding it, and just that whole idea of, there's something greater, there's a greater power, there's there was strategy. There was all of this came from not from man, but from something greater, a God. So I thank you for that wisdom, Ravi. That's incredible, and I'm really keen to sort of dive into a little bit. I know you touched a little bit on the success of the IT company, around some of the other successes of businesses that you've helped, entrepreneurs that you've helped, and maybe just share some testimonies of maybe some of the wisdom you've applied.
Exactly, and it's great, Greg. It's wisdom we're talking about, and I, as I say, you know, if you go into history, King Solomon is in history. He was a king, and he had great wisdom, and people used to pay a lot for his wisdom. They worked out his wealth, and he in modern day times would be 88 times richer than Bill Gates. And so I actually say, you know, I read Bill Gates' biographies. I love the guy. It's great at what he's doing. And so does Warren Buffett. But, you know, there's a guy who was 80 times richer than Bill Gates. So, you know, I'd like to just get myself, if I'm thinking about wisdom, because wisdom helps you and accelerates, it increases your vision, and actually it helps you make right decisions at the right time. So actually you get there quicker and go further and larger. So I found that reading the book of Proverbs, which are 31 Proverbs from Solomon, who in modern day times is 80 times richer than Bill Gates, does help. So I just encourage people to do that, and that's just part of history. But getting back to your question, Greg, I then post, and 5th of August 99 was when we sold the IT recruitment company. You'd remember, you guys are quite young, but Feb 2000 we had a dot-com crash. So it was just amazing. Things just happened at the right time. You know, but it was a very good business that we did sell. Feb 2000 was dot-com crash, but just before the millennium, I then got involved in a computer software company, running. So I'll give you an example. Running for 16 years. The owner was 49 years old and said to me, "Ravi, I can't retire because my pension fund has funded the software development of the company and keeping the staff on. We got a great product, but really I don't have the reserves to retire because everything's tied up in this business, and I can't sell this business, and I'm stuck." And so I got involved. So he'd been running for 16 years, a company in Wimbledon where they play the tennis, and literally having got involved, 3 months later, there's the dot-com crash, and there I am sitting with 50% of a software development company where the whole software market is tanked. So I'm sitting on 50% on a pile of poo, and you think, what do you do? And the amazing thing was, I then really didn't know what to do. So much had changed. This guy was doing everything right. He had all the various business plans. He had been to every motivational course. He'd been on all the Tony Robbins courses. He had been to Stephen Covey courses. He'd got everything. And you just think, what's missing? And in that time, I got the wisdom from the Bible, and it was a keyword which is called spoudazo. It's on my website on rdkeys.com. I tell you that story if you want to look at it. But that one word help focus where the diagnosis was, where the issue was in that business. And once we addressed that, over 14 months, that company got transformed. And despite the dot-com crash carrying on till 2003, when it started recovering the IT sector, we floated that company on the London stock market on the 6th of April 2001. 14 months from the day I entered into that building. And Michael, who is my, in fact, I interview him in one of my modules called Entrepreneurial Academy on how did he float, how did he set up teams, you know, to communicate that to other entrepreneurs. It's called Entrepreneurial Academy. That is just you see, it's not just about a transaction. The point I'm trying to make is we are friends. We meet up every time for his birthday in January.
Mhm.
You know, we try to meet up every 4 or 5 months, and this is 20 years on. You know,
Mhm.
nearly 20 years on, and that's what I like. It's not about transactions, about relationship, long-term relationships.
That's awesome.
I hope you enjoyed that part one of the interview with Ravi. Lots to take away from this first part. Again, a massive honour to have Ravi on the show, and stay tuned for the next release of part B. Stay safe, have a good week.